Huntington's disease. It sounds kind of complicated, right? But really, it all starts with this tiny little echo in our DNA, something that gets passed down from one generation to the next. So today, we're going to break down that genetic story. We're going to look at what it is and the huge impact it has on a person's brain and body. Let's jump in.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with what this disease actually is. Then we'll get into the genetics of it, what I like to call the genetic coin flip. After that, we'll see how it affects a person's mind, their body, and their mood. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how it's diagnosed and, really importantly, how it's managed.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. When we talk about Huntington's disease, what are we actually talking about?
At its heart, Huntington's is a genetic disorder, and it specifically targets a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. Now, you can think of this area as like the brain's control center for keeping all your movements smooth and coordinated. As this part of the brain slowly breaks down over time, it's what triggers all the symptoms of the disease. And here's what makes it so tough. This disease doesn't usually show up when you're a kid. More often than not, it starts to emerge right in the middle of someone's life, usually between the ages of 30 and 50. I mean, it can show up earlier or later, but that's the most common window.
So where does this all come from? Well, it's not something you can catch. The cause is 100% genetic. It's inherited. The root cause is a tiny mistake, a mutation, in a single gene. It's called the HTT gene. Now, this gene is supposed to give the instructions for making a protein called huntingtin, which your nerve cells really need. But when that gene is faulty, it creates a toxic version of the protein, and that's what sets off the whole devastating chain reaction. Take a look at this number, 50%. It's so simple, but it's probably the most important number you need to know to understand how Huntington's gets passed through a family. So here's the deal. If one of your parents has the mutated gene, you have a 50-50 chance of inheriting it yourself. It is a literal coin flip for each and every child. The scientific term for this is an autosomal dominant pattern, which is just a fancy way of saying you only need to get one copy of that faulty gene from just one parent for the disease to develop.
Now, because this disease affects the brain, its impact is just incredibly wide-ranging. The symptoms usually fall into three main buckets, and they really do touch almost every part of a person's life.
First up, you've got the motor symptoms. These are the ones you can see. The most well-known is something called chorea. These are those uncontrollable, jerky, almost dance-like movements. But it's not just that. It's also things like muscle stiffness that makes it hard to move, or a loss of coordination that can make just walking across a room a huge challenge. Then the disease goes after cognition, your ability to think. And it's not just about forgetting things. It can feel like this mental fog that makes it super hard to focus or to organize your thoughts. Things we take for granted, like planning your day or making a simple decision, can become completely overwhelming. And finally, there are the psychiatric symptoms. As the disease literally changes the brain's chemistry, it can have a huge effect on mood and personality. We're talking about serious depression, anxiety, sometimes sudden irritation or anger. And then there's apathy, a total lack of motivation, which can be one of the absolute hardest changes for families to deal with.
Okay, so with all these different symptoms, how in the world do doctors figure out for sure that it's Huntington's? Well, it's a pretty methodical process.
It's really like putting together a three-piece puzzle. First, a doctor does a clinical evaluation. They're looking at the physical symptoms, asking about mood, and digging into the family history. But then comes the key piece, a genetic test. This test can spot that HTT gene mutation with 100% accuracy. And finally, brain scans can back it all up, often showing the physical damage the disease has caused.
Now, as soon as that diagnosis is confirmed, the focus shifts immediately to one thing: management and support. And we have to be really clear about this. Right now, there is no cure for Huntington's. But, and this is a really big but, that does not mean there's nothing to be done. There's actually a lot that can be done to manage the symptoms and really help a person's quality of life.
So the treatment plan usually has two parts. On one side, you have medications. There are drugs like tetrabenazine that can help reduce those jerky movements, and things like SSRIs for the depression and anxiety. On the other side, and this is just as crucial, you have therapies: physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. All of these are designed to help a person adapt and stay as functional as possible for as long as possible.
So what does the road ahead really look like for someone who's living with Huntington's?
The most important thing to understand
is that it is a progressive disease. What that means is, over time, as the damage in the brain continues, the symptoms will gradually get more severe.
And while it's different for every single person, the typical timeline, from when symptoms first start to the more advanced stages, usually unfolds over about 15 to 20 years. But let's end on the most critical takeaway here. Yes, the disease is progressive, but it is not a hopeless journey, not at all. Getting diagnosed early and getting on a good, comprehensive treatment plan with the right support team, the right meds and therapies, can make a world of difference in managing symptoms and maintaining a good quality of life.
And that leaves us with a final, really personal question. If you knew you had a 50-50 chance of inheriting this, would you want to find out for sure? The decision to know is a choice in itself, and honestly, there is no right or wrong answer. It's a heavy question that families touched by this genetic echo have to face. What would you do?